shot.
Right. Where is it?
We can't reach those big guns, and they just keep dropping in. There's nothing you can do. It's just like being a big bullseye on top of a hill, and you're just sitting there waiting. You can't be safe. You can be lucky. That's it.
You can't be safe. You can be lucky.
That's it.
Stuff landing all over, bouncing off you, and you get just as scared every time. And it gets worse. The closer they get, the more they throw. The more you get scared. When you get up, it's a wonderful feeling just to be alive, to be able to walk around after one of those.
If I live 100 years, I'll just never, ever be able to tell the story the way it really happened. These young kids who, you just run up to them, and when we were all boxed in, they were all around, and they were all over our perimeter, and we're throwing grenades, and I got pretty close, and just run up to one of these kids and say, Marine, we're going to get out of here, aren't we? And the kid look up to you and say, you're damn right we are, Skipper.
Those Marines are talking about a place named Tien, an obscure American outpost in Vietnam, as Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Guadalcanal were once obscure. Tien is a bitterly exposed target just 2 miles below the DMZ. American Marines have been under fire there since last May. In just the last 4 weeks, they have suffered over 70 dead, 1,000 wounded. In the next half hour, we shall examine the ordeal of Tien. Tien is here, 2 miles south of the demilitarized zone at the narrow top of South Vietnam, 12 miles inland from the South China Sea. It is a desolate hilltop collection of guns and bunkers looking north across the DMZ into North Vietnam. Its crucial importance lies in the fact that it's on a main infiltration route into the south. The loss of Tien could help open the way for the estimated 35,000 communist troops now massed in the DMZ area. Its loss would block the construction of that electronic barrier along the DMZ to seal off South Vietnam from the north. But more than that, its loss would give the North Vietnamese that one big, elusive propaganda victory they've been searching for at such a cost in lives. They would prize a victory at Tien as a miniature replica of their victory over the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Tien is vulnerable. It is the least defensible of any of the American outposts because it's so close to North Vietnamese territory. The enemy artillery, about 100 big guns plus mortars and rockets, can pound Tien around the clock with devastating effect. And our ground troops cannot go into North Vietnam to knock out those guns. For the Marines at Tien, this is what it's like.
Hear him whistle over your head.
It went off.
I'm making sure to get down. Better keep it.
Emergency medevac, ASAP. Top priority.
All right, somebody take Dr. Wick on it.
Put your arm around it. Make sure I can hear the radio. Hey, you want me to give you a hand? Yeah, on the way, Carter. Okay, you take it easy. Keep your head down, okay? Take it easy, Red. Hey, you want me to call 6 and tell them to get a medevac on the way? Wait a minute. You got more on this camera?
Right.
You rented.
Grandma.
Yeah, boot.
Give me my boot.
Wait a minute, let him get a...
I'm from the Expo. God, like a crash pile this morning. Huh?
680-100. Start 680-100.
680-100. Roger. 81 should be able to see that as well, incident wave. Let's get him on there. Over.
Hey, look, can't get a grid out of bird the same way.
Okay, look. Here are the two tacks. You see them?
Yes, sir.
You see where that smoke is?
Sure.
The smoke landed about 300 meters, right where that big tree is out there. 300 to 400 meters. Southeast of the town.
Okay, we got it coming. I'd say they're probably...
What happened to your squad?
They was hit. Most of them was hit by shrapnel, and there was medevac.
Well, tell me, you came here at full strength,
I had 13 men when I came.
and it's 4 days later now, and how many are still here?
6.
I think we're just occupying ground and losing too many men. I'm losing too many men. If we were to stay here too much longer, we wouldn't have much left of this platoon, let alone the company. I see, what, about 3-4 people get it a day. Not real bad, but enough to be medevac. Cut my platoon down.
Well, isn't that all part of war, as the generals say?
Sure it is, but for 7 months up here, one battalion ain't going to have much left if that's part of war. That'll rotate a little more, I think. Send us back where we can get new men and train them. See, we're getting new men out here. They coming out, well, what you might call green, and then they don't know really how to act.
The rifles have been jamming, the mud's been, has slowed everything down, and the artillery comes in everywhere, and it just gets pretty futile and frustrating sometimes.
The really depressing part about it is, like, there isn't really much you can do, you know what I mean? You see the rounds come in, you see your buddies get blown away and wounded and stuff like that.
Well, I can't say that I'm scared stiff, but I'm scared. I mean, after a while, you know it's going to come. You can't do nothing about it. And you just look to God. It's about the only thing you can do.
Well, do you get any idea from up around Cồn Tiên how the war is going?
Yes. If we don't get some more people up in this area real quick, and we don't get some more B-52s real fast, then these people are going to be all the way down to Da Nang before anybody knows it.
Does everybody agree with that?
100%.
What kind of support are the Marines getting? General Westmoreland says the Americans are responding with the greatest concentration of conventional firepower in history. The U.S. artillery fire is 10 times greater than the enemy's. It comes from Dong Ha, Cam Lo, Jolin, the other outpost corners of what is called Leatherneck Square, and from these big guns at Camp Carroll. The batteries fire off as many as 10,000 shells daily, lobbing them over the heads of the men at Cồn Tiên deep into the demilitarized zone. And then there are the B-52 bombers striking from nearby Thailand. They pound the zone day in, day out with tons of explosives. With this saturation, why haven't the North Vietnamese positions been destroyed? Marine commanders say the enemy guns, most of them highly mobile, roll in and out of deep caves and tunnels. Only a direct hit can silence them. And there has been no silence at Cồn Tiên. The story of how Cồn Tiên came to be a miniature Korea began last May. The Marines there were in construction battalions clearing strips to help protect against attacks. The outpost was little more than a few trenches dug on a hilltop, still green and unscorched, manned by 300 South Vietnamese civilian irregulars advised by a handful of American Special Forces troops. The few bunkers looked more like temporary homes for the men who were there to operate the graders and earth movers. But they were some protection against occasional artillery attacks. Then things got rougher. On the morning of May the 9th, burning tanks and personnel carriers marked a battle that had begun at 2:30 a.m. and lasted till after daybreak. The hilltop was strewn with dead. 200 of them, like this one. North Vietnamese regulars. The enemy had struck with a force of 1,200 men. Captured enemy weapons were gathered from all over the perimeter. The cost to the Americans in that first battle at Cồn Tiên included 124 wounded. Of these, 110 were Marines, the rest Special Forces men. And there were our own dead, 44 Americans altogether, all of them Marines, the first to fall at Cồn Tiên. For the next few months, there was less action than preparation for action. The Marines had come to stay, to take control of Cồn Tiên from the South Vietnamese. The plan now was to establish a post on the hilltop that could be more easily defended. That meant more bunkers and well-protected gun emplacements. The expectation then was for another ground assault. Enemy artillery was fairly inactive until July, when it got busier. The Americans retaliated with airstrikes. For the rest of July and August, the Marines at Cồn Tiên used their own guns to good effect. The ammunition, an endless supply, came in daily, and it was used up daily. This was the end of a supply lifeline that began in Da Nang and arrived at Cồn Tiên by way of Dong Ha, 6 miles to the south. And there were tents nearby to house a complement that included about 1,000 men. No matter how you look at it, those were better days. There was more time for things like the casual cleaning of weapons. But nothing at Cồn Tiên has been casual since September came. For the first 25 days of this month, Cồn Tiên had to fight back against ground assaults and a sudden calculated escalation of enemy artillery, the most intense artillery barrage of the war. At times, the shouts of incoming could be heard above the noise of our own guns. There has been a slight let-up in the last few days, but Marines still must patrol the perimeter of Cồn Tiên, and for these men the danger is multiplied by the threat of ambush. The kind of war that's going on around Thien inspired one young Marine to put his feelings into a poem.
When youth was a soldier and I fought across the sea, we were young and cold hearts of bloody savagery, born of indignation, children of our time. We were orphans of creation and dying in our prime.
What made you write that poem?
Well, just the way things are.
The commanders in Vietnam, the men who must decide when ordeals must be borne, look at the ordeal at Thien from a different vantage point. We talked with General William Westmoreland, commander of American ground forces, and Lieutenant General Robert Cushman, who commands the Marines there.
There have been some questions from outside and in your own command structure, all the way down to some privates I met on Thien, about the defense of that outpost, and some who perhaps aren't as confident as the general may be.
Well, when you sit in a place such as that and night comes on, you really have to rely upon yourself and upon supporting fires, and naturally the confidence may not be as great as it is back here, where I can see the many forces that can be brought to bear, and which those right on the spot may not be aware. I am confident that we can hold this area, and we have been doing it. Furthermore, from what reports we've had from prisoners and documents, we've been hurting the enemy badly.
They have attempted to make it appear that they are winning a military victory. Their target is American public opinion. They had hoped that by inflicting these casualties, it being fully understood by them that the casualties inflicted upon their ranks were unknown to us, that they would achieve their psychological victory. And this is the only way they can conceivably win this war.
Thien, then, you're saying, is not really a military action, but a political or psychological warfare action.
Precisely. Their objective is political and psychological. It is designed to weaken the will of the American people, to make it appear in American and public and world opinion that they are stronger than they are in fact, and to discourage our resolve.
We asked two of our CBS News correspondents who've been under fire with the Marines at Thien for an assessment of the situation there, John Lawrence and Robert Shackney. We asked them first, what are the Marines saying right now about Thien?
Well, Mike, if the Marine happens to be an infantryman, he feels that he'd rather be someplace else. I've heard a lot of Marines say that Thien is a very poor place to defend because the Marines can't move out on the ground with infantrymen and with tanks to attack the positions from which the North Vietnamese are firing their artillery. That's on the other side of the border. Now, if the Marines were to pull back 5 or 10 miles and the North Vietnamese were to follow them with their artillery, then the communists would no longer be invulnerable from Marine counterattack on the ground.
The Marine riflemen on Thien, or grunts as they call themselves, would rather be anywhere, out on an operation marching or back at the rear sleeping, anywhere but Thien. In their simple teenage philosophy, they don't understand the significance of holding on to what you've got, or as it's said in the Orient, saving face. The Pentagon gives orders to the generals, and the generals give order to the colonels, and so on, and all the orders are obeyed. But the grunts don't seem to understand that they're holding Thien because of a Pentagon decision to win the war with a kind of modern Maginot line that hasn't been built yet.
And what lies ahead for Thien in the coming weeks?
There's not likely to be much change, Mike, as long as the monsoons last. The heavy rains are supposed to start this month, and they'll last 2 or 3 months, and during that period, it's unlikely that the Marines can reopen the roads. Marines say that they can resupply themselves for defensive purposes with helicopters, but all that's very limited. The Marines won't be able to move out and in force until the road dries out. Now, whether the North Vietnamese are going to use this period to continue to shell the Marines or whether they'll try something more substantial is, of course, something that nobody on this side can answer. But during the monsoons, Thien is most isolated, air power is most limited, and the Marines will be most vulnerable.
The big question really seems to be whether or not the North Vietnamese intend to overrun Thien. The Marines have tripled the number of troops guarding the outpost, and they've moved up more battalions to be ready to reinforce. If the North Vietnamese decide to attack Con Thien, they must know it will cost them between 5,000 and 10,000 casualties. They've only decided to do that once before, in 1954, when they felt it would be the final victory, and it was. But the United States could survive the loss of Con Thien, get more troop backs, and retake it. So it would not seem to be in the best interest of the North Vietnamese to attack Con Thien in the near future. They'll probably continue to shell it, and the Marines will continue to take it. 2 years ago, when the first of 500,000 Americans began settling into their enclaves here, with the fresh Pentagon promises of a quick victory, the generals were promoting the new military strategy of the air mobile offense. Now, in the light of Con Thien, the generals are explaining their successes with the words, mobile defense. Mobile defense seems to mean putting 3,000 men on the ground and allowing them to sit in the mud and wait for the shell with their name on it. The military can no longer justify this war with a casualty count. It may be that more Marines are dying along the DMZ than enemy. Anyway, no one doubts General Giap's strategy of sacrificing 10 of his own for 1 American, and few here believe our own exaggerated guesses at enemy casualties. The Marines have not run any operations into the DMZ since this summer because there are not enough regiments to be sure of victory. They stay fairly close to their bases, to within a few hundred yards for most. It begins to sound like a conventional war with a conventional front, and in a few years, the Marines who have come down off Con Thien will talk as proudly as those who came back from the Chosin Reservoir. What it all seems to mean is that American Marines have been committed to protect a key outpost along a cleared, fortified barrier that was originally conceived in controversy and at present cannot be constructed. What seems to be overlooked is the ability of the North Vietnamese to escalate this war step by step with Washington. You begin to suspect that we've reached the limits of our present strategy when the generals are talking openly about an invasion of the North, and the men around Con Thien are talking about the need for tactical nuclear weapons.
There seems little doubt that it is the administration's resolve to stay at Con Thien. The president made that clear last Friday night in his speech to the nation, when he pointed to the Marines up at the DMZ as the real peacekeepers. Lyndon Johnson understands that a defeat or even a withdrawal now at Con Thien could be for him a political Dien Bien Phu. The president's dilemma is how to persuade the North Vietnamese to quit up there. Up to now, pure firepower hasn't done it, and it seems unlikely that he would order American troops into North Vietnam to do the job. Moscow and Peking would be bound to react sharply to such an escalation. Meantime, for the Marines at Con Thien, the months ahead look grimmer than ever. The fall monsoon rains have just begun. They will go on till February, hampering American air power, depriving the men on the ground of at least some of the air support they desperately need. The artillery duel at Con Thien will go on and on. This battle is different from any other action in the war in that there is no let-up. Day after unchanging day. And as long as the North Vietnamese can resupply their troops and guns, as long as they can send down reinforcements, there is little the Marines can do about it. Mike Wallace, CBS News, New York.
CBS News film cameramen at Con Thien, Keith Kay, Gerard P., John Smith, Carl Sorensen, Kurt Volkert, P.B. Wan, and the CBS News soundmen, Pham Van Way, Phaloop Rod Boone, Phan Chan, Thanong Hiransi, D.V. Ree, Pham Tan Don.
It's so close to North Vietnamese territory. The enemy artillery, about 100 big guns plus mortars and rockets, can pound Con Thien around the clock with devastating effect. And our ground troops cannot go into North Vietnam to knock out those guns. For the Marines at Con Thien, this is what it's like. Its crucial importance lies in the fact that it's on a main infiltration route into the South. The loss of Cồn Tiên could help open the way for the estimated 35,000 communist troops now massed in the DMZ area. Its loss would block the construction of that electronic barrier along the DMZ to seal off South Vietnam from the north. But more than that, its loss would give the North Vietnamese that one big, elusive propaganda victory they've been searching for at such a cost in lives. They would prize a victory at Cồn Tiên as a miniature replica of their victory over the French at Dien Bien Phu in 1954. Cồn Tiên is vulnerable. It is the least defensible of any of the American outposts because it...
What's that?
Right. Where is it?
We can't reach those big guns, and they just keep dropping in. There's nothing you can do. It's just like being a big bullseye on top of a hill, and you're just sitting there waiting. You can't be safe. You can be lucky. That's it.
You can't be safe. You can be lucky.
That's it.
Stuff landing all over, bouncing off you, and you get just as scared every time. And it gets worse. The closer they get, the more they throw. The more you get scared. Then you get up. It's a wonderful feeling just to be alive, to be able to walk around after one of those.
If I live 100 years, I'll just never, ever be able to tell the story the way it really happened. These young kids who, you just run up to them, and when we were all boxed in, they were all around, and they were all over our perimeter, and we're throwing grenades, and got pretty close, and just run up to one of these kids and say, Marine, we're going to get out of here, aren't we? And the kid look up to you and say, you're damn right we are, Skipper.
Those Marines are talking about a place named Cồn Tiên, an obscure American outpost in Vietnam, as Tarawa, Iwo Jima, and Guadalcanal were once obscure. Cồn Tiên is a bitterly exposed target just 2 miles below the DMZ. American Marines have been under fire there since last May. In just the last 4 weeks, they have suffered over 70 dead, 1,000 wounded. In the next half hour, we shall examine the ordeal of Cồn Tiên. Cồn Tiên is here, 2 miles south of the demilitarized zone at the narrow top of South Vietnam, 12 miles inland from the South China Sea. It is a desolate hilltop collection of guns and bunkers looking north across the DMZ into